So we started sanding the hull sides and we're about to wrap around to the transom, but it's really time to address it. So I showed in the original video, we have some delamination. Now, it is not a rotted transom. It's actually still very tight. It's just that the top skin has come away from the back skin. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna epoxy fill as much as we can, and then we're gonna clamp it all together. If this was a rotted transom, I would cut it about 2 inches all the way to each side, and then tab the fiberglass piece back in after we replace the plywood, but the plywood's still very good in there. It's just that, like I said, the two skins have come apart from each other. So stay tuned. We're gonna start working on that. You can see another just rotted piece of wood. This is just where those two pieces of wood were attached for the outboard. We're gonna replace both of those with much more substantial, much nicer pieces of wood, and we'll finish those completely. But just want to give you a shot of that before we hop into the work. We're going to get started here by taking off this rotted piece of wood that's hanging off the back here. Again, this was just a part of the little clamping mechanism for the outboard. We're going to get that out of the way. Like I said before, it's not rotten, and a good indication of that is the screws that were holding on that piece of wood are still very much intact and still very tight within the fiberglass there. So we'll unscrew those after we get the transom epoxied here. So what I'm using, because again, we're doing this on a budget, I went on Amazon and I just picked, basically it's a quart kit of 1-to-1 marine epoxy. It has good adhesion qualities, good filling qualities. And I took it one step further. I had some epoxy reducer and I added about 10 to 15% of that just so it would inject a little deeper with the syringe. So I was saying before, basically we're filling a void here. When this boat was originally manufactured, when it was built, there was basically a 1-inch gap all the way around the top of that piece of plywood going up to the fiberglass. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill in that void the best we can, fill in the seam, and then let the epoxy do the work. So you're seeing that here. You'll also see shortly all the clamps I'm going to put on here. I probably put 6 or 8 clamps on this, and that's just to make sure that both the top shell and the back shell really get held together very well. And it's held together for the entire 24 hours. That's the most important thing. Whenever you're working with epoxies, depending on which one, some cure faster, some cure slower. For a deep fill like this, you always want to be on the slower side. You don't want any exotherm. You don't want any heat building up and possibly compromising your repair. So this is also a slow curing epoxy. It's a 24-hour epoxy. And again, I chose that because I didn't want any heat to be introduced here. I wanted good adhesion and good filling qualities. Depending on your repair, you can mix or match the epoxy depending on what you need to accomplish. So the most important thing here, 1, it filled. 2, it had good adhesion qualities. 3, it was cheap. So we're going to take off the clamps. You'll see that here shortly, and you'll see we've got a good tight bond. All right, let's see how we did. This is why it's always very good to try to use, especially if you're doing epoxy work, clamps that have plastic feet so the epoxy doesn't stick to it. So far there's been no movement at all here, which is exactly what we're looking for. And there you go. All fixed, epoxy hard. We're ready to resume sanding on the transom.